Hey guys, welcome back to Justin Reads Romance. I'm Justin, and today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in the first half of July. Kicking off with Muse of Nightmares, okay? So this is actually the second part of a duet, Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. And I read Strange the Dreamer at the tail end of June for my Patreon exclusive vlog. And guys, whenever I tell you that this book, Strange the Dreamer and Muse of Nightmares, they're one of my favorite books that I've read this year, and I'm just so happy with this fantasy story. It is technically considered YA, and this is exactly what I mean when I say that it's not that I dislike YA fantasy. It's that I need the characters to feel more mature for their age, and that's exactly what happened with this one. Like Laszlo, who is the main character, he is in his early 20s. Our heroine is only 17, if I remember correctly. And this is marketed as YA, but I feel like the conflict that is presented is such a vast, like world-changing, all-encompassing type of conflict, and the characters are dealing with very like adult situations. That's the type of YA romance that I can definitely get on board with. And the writing in this is so beautiful. I think that it's incredibly creative. I love the way that Laini Taylor incorporates these gods and these words that are very particular to this fantasy world that tie in so well to each part, each section of the book that she splits it into. It's just so beautiful. And Laszlo, who is the main character of this story, is one of the most compelling and endearing. He is just like, he's such a good guy. He's very altruistic and almost innocent in a way with how he is so open to learning, and he's just so compelling because he's so open to ideas and like new things. And I just really love his character so much, and I feel like Sarai is such an amazing compliment to Laszlo because of what she's had to endure. So this story focuses on Laszlo, who is basically tasked to find a way to move this floating city that is above the lost city of Weep. And this floating city on top of it was controlled by gods. And Errol Fane, his basically mentor, is known as the God Killer, the God Slayer, because he was the one to kill these people who claimed they were gods, right? But then they were oppressing the city. But they have no way of moving this big floating city that has shrouded the city of Weep in shadow for, decades. And finally, they have gone out to other countries and tried to bring in people who are good at their craft to try to find a solution to moving this city, get it off of the top of the city of Weep. And then Sarai is actually the daughter of one of those gods. And nobody in the city of Weep is aware that there were any survivors from that massacre of the gods and their children. So there are these 5 basically teenagers who are living up in the floating city, and nobody's aware that they're there. And I think that the way that this story plays out and the complicated relationships that Laini Taylor explores are probably some of my favorites, like the relationship between Laszlo and Thyone. Love that. With Minya and the rest of the demigods, like I absolutely loved what Laini Taylor did. And I'm not gonna lie, I was very hesitant to say that I would ever sympathize with Minya, and I was definitely proven wrong by the end of it. I did in fact sympathize with Minya at the end, and I was so convinced. I was like, this person is hateful, and I dislike this character so much, and I wouldn't care if they died. Like, I absolutely hated her, especially at the end of Strange the Dreamer and, the first half of Muse of Nightmares. I was like not on her side at all. I just couldn't see the appeal of like trying to empathize with her character, right? In contrast, like Thyone, who I wouldn't classify him technically as the rival of Laszlo, because Laszlo's not trying to be rivals with Thyone, but Thyone, has a little grudge against Laszlo for being helpful and nice. When I was first introduced to Thyone and I found out his background and stuff, I was hopeful. I was like, okay, I could see character growth being something that Laini Taylor could possibly explore in the book. So I was much more open to Thyone having almost like a redemption than I was to Minya. And I think that Muse of Nightmares wrapped up the story so beautifully. I also think that Laini Taylor is so skilled because she introduced 2 new characters at the beginning called Cora or Caro, I can't remember which one, and Nova. and these two characters who kind of came out of the blue, and you weren't quite sure how they were going to play into the story of the characters that we were already introduced to in Strange the Dreamer, but it was so well done, and I loved what she did with those characters in Muse of Nightmares. So yeah, absolutely 6 stars. Both books, Strange the Dreamer and Muse of Nightmare, were 6 stars for me. Delicious, beautiful, like everything I ever wanted in a fantasy story. They just did that. So I basically started off July with like high expectations after coming off of Strange the Dreamer and Muse of Nightmares. Next, I picked up The Best Laid Plans by Carla Sorensen. This book isn't even out until October, I think. I don't know if I wrote it down, but it's not out for a while, but I don't know. I was just like in the mood for a little bit of change of pace from going from fantasy. I was like, I need contemporary. I like Carla Sorensen. She usually writes sports romances. And this is the start of a new series called The Best Men. And the story actually starts off with our hero, Burke. I think his name's Burke Barrett. I don't love whenever characters have like a last name as a first name and vice versa, like Burke Barrett. Like, I don't know. Both of those are like first names to me. And I also know somebody who lived in my old neighborhood and their last name was Burke. So anyway, that's just like a little aside that actually has nothing to do with the story. So Burke inherits this house. His friend, his best friend that he's been knowing since college, they played in the NFL together, has recently passed away. He and his wife were in a car wreck, and as part of his will, his best friend willed this house. It's like an old Victorian mansion. I'm not quite sure exactly what type of architecture it was, so don't quote me on that, but I'm just gonna say it's Victorian. And the house has a lot of significance to his best friend. It was his grandparents' house, and when they were only like in college and didn't have like a lot of money, he lamented the fact that after his grandparents died, the house was sold and somebody random bought the house, and his friend really, like, one of his dreams is like to one day have enough money and to be able to buy this house, because he has such strong memories and great memories of his grandparents and the house being so magical. So his friend finally purchased the house, and he and his wife had plans to renovate it, and then they tragically passed away. And now not only is Bert grieving for his friends, but he has this responsibility that he didn't ask for being thrust upon him, and you can tell like Burke is a little bit depressed, and not only because of his friend dying, but just like with his life, how it's going for him. He was in the NFL, he got hurt, so he's forced to retire. He was also married, and that marriage didn't work out well, and he's in the process of moving to Florida to be with his sister and her kids and just kind of like start a new life in Florida. And all of a sudden this house in I think it's Traverse City actually where the house is at. And the only reason why I know that is because I actually know somebody who I went to high school with. She moved to Traverse City, and it looks beautiful, and I always want to go visit there. Anyway, he has this responsibility. He has to go travel over there and see like what's to be done. Like what can I do? Can I possibly sell this house? Like, he's looking to basically offload this house. He doesn't want this responsibility. He just wants to go to Florida and just start anew, right? When he gets there, I believe she's like the contractor that his best friend and his wife is working with, and her name's Charlotte. And she is so obsessed with restoring these old homes and making them like historically accurate, like keeping the character of the house, like not doing a big gut and making it super modern. Like, she wants to keep all of the original elements, and if you keep enough of those original elements and don't make it too modern, like you're qualified for it to be considered like a historical building, and like you have tax cuts or whatever. So she's so adamant that she wants the dreams of what this house could be that the couple had originally had. She wants them realized. And so she has to convince Burke, like, this is worthwhile. I know that you want to go to Florida. I know that you don't want to stay here, but like, this is worth doing. So this is like a slow burn, forced proximity, because Burke ends up by moving in with Charlotte. They're living over, basically it's like a carriage house, like above the garage, little apartment suite that's also kind of falling apart, and they're forced to stay with each other. And it is a very, very slow burn. And I actually really enjoyed the relationship, but I felt like a lot more emphasis was put in the actual ins and outs of restoring a house, which I totally understand. Like, if you're super interested in that, like, I mean, I watch HGTV. I love seeing people gut a house and like restore it, and just like the transformation that you can achieve. And I like it in theory. I don't know if I like reading about it in a lot of technical aspects and stuff. And I guess because I don't have the same passion as Charlotte. She's so passionate about the original spindles and this original thing, and ooh, I want to do this. She's a little bit of a hoarder. She doesn't want to get rid of like anything, and like that's kind of the opposite of how I am. I'm not at all a hoarder, and I'm like, let's please make this new. So it was a little bit hard to, like, I liked Charlotte's character. I didn't dislike her, but I also didn't really identify with her that much. And I also felt like Burke's character remained feeling quite depressed, which it's not that I wanted him to get over his friend's death, but just with life, like he was a bit of a downer about life in general. So his character was also a little bit hard to just like swoon over because he was so depressed all the time. So this book was good. It just wasn't my favorite book by Carla Sorensen by any means, but I am interested in reading the rest of the series. So like I said, the best friend and his wife, they died, but they also had a little girl. I think she's only like 2 years old. And in that will, they named 2 friends as the little girl, I think her name's Mira, their guardians. So it's kind of like, what's that movie with Katherine Heigl? And it's the same situation where there's like a kid that is orphaned and 2 friends who don't even like each other are both named as guardians for like the same kid, and they have to try to work together. I can see hints of that. We only meet one, Liam, I believe his name is, and he was also a football star. And we see this wonderful moment where he's being like such a good dad figure at this football game that they're all going to honor Chris's memory at his alma mater. And Liam is with the little girl Mira, and I just love the vibe that I was getting from Liam, because he's like this foul-mouthed, very intimidating sort of guy, but like whenever he was talking to Mira, he was like so soft, and like I love that. So we don't know. We know that it's a girl who's also the other guardian, but we don't meet her. And I believe that's going to be book 2, and I'm very excited about book 2. So decent start to a series. Wasn't my favorite by Carla Sorensen. I gave it 4 stars. And then I read Where Dreams Begin by Lisa Kleypas. So this was also a Patreon pick for this month. The heroine is a widow. She has lost her husband George, who she was in love with 3 years ago. She's finally coming out of mourning, and her in-laws are encouraging her to get back out in the world. You know, she's been in true mourning for her husband for the past 3 years. She also gave birth to a daughter not that long before her husband died. So she has a little girl named Rose who's very cute in this story. The first ball that she attends after being out of mourning, she actually runs into this guy when she's trying to leave the party. Basically, she's had enough. She's made an appearance. Now she has this migraine and she's ready to go home. Her brother-in-law sends for a carriage, and he tells her to wait into like an adjoining room, like close to the front of the house, while the carriage is being pulled up, because it's just a mess. There's like so many carriages at this ball. So she has to wait a little while. While she's in this darkened room, the stranger kind of like accosts her, but thinks that she is another woman who he has a planned assignation with, okay? And so he kisses her, and she is very surprised by her reaction. Has a lot of different mixed emotions about being kissed. One, she's devastated because this kiss has erased like the last kiss from her beloved husband George. This person has taken that away from her, but also she's like, this is a very different kiss than what I've ever experienced from George. She doesn't want to say better, but it is definitely different. It's a little bit more passionate, a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more lustful than she's ever had with her husband. And so she's a little bit intrigued, and she's horrified that she feels intrigued by this man. And so they have that little moment, and then he realizes, oh my God, you're not the person that I thought you were, and I'm so sorry about that. When she's leaving, this man is not gonna let it go. His name's Zachary Bronson. He's nouveau riche. He has come from nothing. He actually used to be a prize fighter, made a lot of money doing that, and then invested that money, and now he's just super freaking rich, and he's trying to have or get entry into society, nobility. He wants his sister, who is in her early 20s, to be able to make her debut, make a good match, right? So Zach is fascinated by Holly. He's a little bit intrigued. He doesn't know why, because he's had beautiful women before. Holly is attractive, but not the most attractive, and she's a lot more reserved, and he's a very like passionate guy. So he finds out her name, and he constructs this scenario to force Holly into his life. He invites her to his house, which is so gaudy, like what you expect from the nouveau riche, just extravagance and elegance like thrown up all over the place in excess. And he tells Holly that he's looking for somebody to instill like manners in him and let him know exactly what he needs to do to gain entry into the upper echelons of society so that he can help his sister and stuff like that. But he's kind of thinking of seducing Holly, like that's his main motive. He makes her an offer she can't refuse, basically gives her a ton of money. I think it's 30,000 pounds, 20,000 to go to her daughter Rose and 10,000 for her, and also like a carriage and a team of horses whenever Rose eventually gets married, like down the line, like as part of her dowry. And Holly has been kind of thinking, like, she loves her in-laws, they've been really good to her, they're not the most wealthy aristocratic family in the ton, and she feels a little bit like a burden. And so whenever Zach makes this very extravagant offer to her, she's like, well, this is what I can do for the future of my daughter. Even if my reputation takes a ding from this, like I feel like the amount of money that he's gonna bestow on my daughter Rose is worth it to ensure her future. So she's really doing it for her daughter Rose. But the problem with, or I shouldn't say the problem with Holly, I think that the difficulty that Zach has with his plans in seducing Holly is the fact that Holly is very much still attached to her deceased husband, George. And she's always thinking about like, is this what George would want from me? And she's always thinking about how her actions would be interpreted by her husband. As she's starting to have feelings for Zach, you know, sometimes those thoughts are in opposition. And I just really enjoyed this story a lot. I really do enjoy a good hulking, intimidating looking man being so soft in the presence of children. Lisa Kleypas always incorporates children so well, and Rose is no different. She is such a cute little kid, and the way that Zach immediately takes to her, he's not intimidated by interacting with children, and he even like demonstrates how different he is from the aristocracy by his willingness to actually play with like a little girl, like be like, yeah, let's get on the floor and play games or whatever. And you know, Holly is charmed by this. So I really like their relationship. I enjoyed this book a lot. I gave it 4.25 stars. It was pretty good. The only like nitpicky things that I have to say is more like the conflicts toward the end. There's almost 2 conflicts and I felt like it was a little excessive. Like the book could have ended a little bit earlier, and I had similar feelings when I read Suddenly You. Like there was 2 conflicts toward the end and one of them felt like a little bit unnecessary. Like the book went on for a little bit too long. So anyway, 4.25 stars, still a very solid read. Next I read At the Bride Hunt Ball by Olivia Parker, and I've never read any book by Olivia Parker before. Interesting premise, not exactly executed in the way that I feel like was a successful romance for me. So Gabriel is the Duke of Wolverest or something, and like nickname is Wolf. He has decided, and we are unaware in the beginning of this book, for a great portion of this book, we are unaware of why this very young Duke, I feel he's only like in his early 30s, has basically sworn off marriage. He is adamant that he's never gonna get married, he's never gonna procreate, but he still wants his line to continue. So he puts it all on his younger brother, and he's like, okay, my younger brother's gonna get married and his children are gonna carry on the dukedom. So he has constructed, it almost feels like a game and kind of like a little bit of a bachelorette kind of contest, to invite these women to a house party, and there's going to be a ball, and at the end of that his younger brother is going to pick a wife and marry her. These women are getting these invitations, they're handed out at some other balls and stuff like that, and our heroine Madeline receives an invitation as well. And interestingly enough, their sister, the Duke's sister, is the one that's actually picking out the women and handing out the invitations. So Madeline actually meets the Duke without knowing that he is the Duke, actually has a lot to say about what she thinks about the Duke to his face, but she doesn't know that that's him. She thinks that he's a relative. A little bit convoluted. The story is a little bit convoluted, I feel. They go to the house party. She has a best friend who is obsessed with the younger brother. And I feel like, honestly, that friend and her obsession with trying to present herself in like the best light by like completely changing herself in the hopes that the younger brother will pick her really turned me off from the story, like a lot. And I think that her book is like the second book, and I'm just like completely uninterested in reading more in this series at the very least. But so Madeline and the Duke, who has said over and over again that he's never going to get married, and we don't know why, like what has caused you to not want to get married, we eventually find out, and I just don't feel like it was a good enough reason. It was weird, and it was also weird that it was a secret why he didn't want to get married. It was really, I just found it strange. It wasn't worthy of being a mystery I guess is what I would say. Main problem with this book and why it didn't work for me is the hot and cold of the relationship between Madeline and the Duke. It just didn't work for me. I don't like hot and cold, and I mean like they would go extremely far physically and then the next day, like, you know, give him the cold shoulder and ignore, and it was just like a lot of like teenagery kind of antics that I didn't really enjoy. I don't really enjoy that at all in historical romance or any romance, to be honest. So I gave this one 3 stars. It was just okay. Next, I read The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy by Megan Bannon, which was the other book for my Patreon exclusive vlog. This is a fantasy story, and I really like the relationship. It's an enemies to lovers romance. Heart is a marshal, think like, you know, police, and Mercy is an undertaker's daughter. Her father has been sick. She's basically been taking over the business, but she's just waiting for her younger brother to graduate from college so that he can become the new undertaker. And the problem comes in when she finds out that her brother has not been studying, you know, taking his undertaker courses. He has graduated in something completely different because he's not interested in becoming an undertaker and taking over the business from his father. And apparently all undertaker businesses are passed from father to son. So Mercy's like, well, I can't do it, even though she's been doing it for like the past 3 years or 2, whatever. She's been doing it for a while, right? She and Hart butt heads because Hart drops off these bodies who are basically unidentified bodies to Mercy, and they always have like this sniping session with each other. They just never liked each other from the first moment that they've met. Their very first interaction was like not the best and not the greatest. And then one day Hart decides to write this letter. He sends it to nobody. He addresses it as to a friend, and he signs from a friend. And he's getting his thoughts out, right? He's just writing this letter, and all of his emotions are spilling out into this letter, and he's just sending it out, and he feels better now that he put thoughts to his page. He doesn't expect anybody to write him back because he doesn't put an address on the envelope, but the message, the letter, actually gets delivered to Mercy, and Mercy writes back. And so they have this almost pen pal relationship where they're chatting with each other. They hate each other in real life, but they're getting to know each other through these letters. So I actually enjoyed the relationship quite a bit. The problem that I ran into with this book is that the fantasy world was very messily set up. I don't think the world building was done in a great way because I had so many questions, and at first I thought it was going to be vague intentionally, but I think it was past the 60% mark where the author actually decided to give you a history of like what's going on in this world. There's old gods, there's new gods. Hart is a demigod, so his father, who he does not know, was a god, and he doesn't know who he was. And like, what's the significance of these gods? What's the significance of being a demigod? And I just felt like the world wasn't set up in a way where I knew what was going on. Like the messengers who actually deliver the letters, like they're animals and they can speak and think and feel and they're intelligent, but there's also other animals, like Mercy has a dog who doesn't speak or think or feel. So I'm like, well, what's special about these animals? I have a lot of unanswered questions about this world, and I think it was a little messy. I don't think it was great. So I gave this book 3.25 stars. The next book I read was Remember Me by Mary Balogh. This is the second book in her Remember series, and I did feel like the first book in the series was almost like a prologue. It was introducing this family and this pivotal moment in this family's history where the dad, who, to preface this by saying, the family thought that they were like one of the perfect families, that their parents were perfectly happy married, and they had tons of siblings, and they were all just living in this nice little bubble of like, we're the most charming family, we love each other, and we're so close, right? Then they find out that the dad has been having extramarital affairs for a very long time, and the dad got really reckless enough to bring his mistress to a house party and like a festival that always happens in their country home. He brought his mistress under the guise of her being like a new widow that's new to the area, and he like hooks up with her at this ball, and his oldest son, legitimate son, actually discovers him, okay? And it causes a huge rift in the family, and it has like far-reaching consequences, and we have like a time jump to like 6 years later, and that's the first book. The second book is the eldest daughter, Pippa, and she's been greatly affected by, you know, her brother being forced to leave the family. Her reputation or the reputation of the family has affected her debut in society. She actually decides not to debut at all because I think it was the following year, maybe the year that she was going to be presented, her mom and dad bringing her to London. They were having like the spring festival, and she overhears this guy who she thought was beautiful and she was attracted to him and hadn't been introduced to him, but she knows he's the Marquess of Roth. And she overhears the Marquess calling her soiled goods, basically. And this devastates her. She's like, oh, this isn't just an event that has been contained to the country. Other people know about it. I don't want to subject myself to that, being debuted in society and being a laughingstock. So she decides not to go. And she is rejected every season after that. So I think it was like 4 years that she has not gone to London. Now her brother's back. He is the new Earl, and she is going to be presented in London for a season. And the romance is between her and that very same Marquis who called her soiled goods. And what I think is so interesting and so different from what I guess I expected, and I was so pleasantly surprised, is their first interaction early on in the book. So Pippa goes to London with her mother and her younger sister, and her brother is going to be meeting them in London later on, the new Earl. And she gets invited to this house party, and the woman is actually a good friend of her mother's, who her mother hasn't even seen her in years, but they both had debuts together. She is the daughter of a duke, and she's like, hey, I'm gonna have this tea and you should come bring your daughter. We'll introduce her to some people. What she doesn't know is that this is the aunt of the Marquis of Roth. So his name is Lucas. Sorry, I need to stop just calling him the Marquis. Lucas, this is his aunt. So Lucas makes an appearance at this tea, and he's introduced to Pippa, and he thinks she's beautiful, and his grandparents, who are the current Duke and Duchess, his father has passed away, and he's like next in line for becoming the next Duke, and they want him to marry sooner rather than later because their line isn't really good about producing sons, and so they're like, you need to jump on this ball. This is your duty. You need to select a wife this year. So he sees Pippa, he's introduced to her, he's thinking she's looking, you know, beautiful, and he's charmed by her. When they're left alone together, he sees like she kind of has a strained smile, and he doesn't know why. He's never met this girl before in his life, right? He doesn't remember that she is the daughter of that notorious Earl. And when they're alone, she turns to him and says, remember me? And the fact that Mary Balog has Pippa confront him right off the bat on their very first actual meeting where they talk to each other, I loved it. And he was like, have we met before? Have we been introduced before? And she's like, not formally, but if you remember a couple years ago, you were at the festival and you called me soiled goods. Like, she says it to his face, and I was like, oh my God, I love this girl so much. And Lucas is actually so embarrassed. He remembers it. His face just drains, and he's like, oh my God. He had no idea that she overheard, and we don't know why he said it. He does say that he's very sorry, he's very apologetic, and we know that there has to be a reason why he said it, right? He wasn't just being like mean. There's a reason why he did say it, and I think that the revelation of like what prompted him to even think it, even though it was very unfair, he knows it was very unfair to judge her by her father's actions, and she had nothing to do with what a piece of shit the Earl was. I feel like it was a very compelling reason that we find out later on. And it's an unlikely, almost like forced friendship that happens between them, because his grandfather, the Duke, immediately takes a liking to Pippa, and he's like, this would be a perfect wife for you. And Lucas is like, it's just not gonna happen. And he doesn't want to tell his grandfather what he did. So it's like his grandfather's playing matchmaker so hard for him and Pippa, and they're both reluctant to say like why this wouldn't be a good match, but then they're forced to spend a lot of time with each other. And one of my favorite parts of the book is actually the Duke and the Duchess and the relationship with Lucas, and I just really loved it. So this book, I feel like, definitely leans more towards family saga. Crystal was the one to, recommend this series by Mary Balog to me, and I've previously read The Bedouins and I really loved it. It feels very different from The Bedouins. The Bedouins also focuses on a family, but I feel it leans more heavily into like a traditional structure of a romance. And this one, the romance is a lot quieter. It's a slow burn, but like once the characters realize their feelings for each other, and it happens toward the end, I feel like it kind of comes out of nowhere, and it's like, wait, hold on. We went from, I don't know if I even like this person, to I love this person. I think that that's one of the complaints that I have about this book and this series, like from books 1 and book 2. I felt similarly about both of them. Like we were so slow burning, and I felt like, yes, I could see the potential for them falling in love, and I could see the potential there, and then all of a sudden we went past falling in love and straight to in love, and I felt like a step was skipped, basically. So, but I still liked it. I gave it 4.25 stars, and I'm definitely going to be reading the rest of the series. Very interested in the rest of the siblings getting their HEA. It's just very different. It's very, very different than any other historical romance that I've ever read. But I still liked it. And then I also reread Flawless and Heartless because we're going to review them for the podcast. So I'm not going to go into how much I love these books. You can listen to an episode on the podcast when it's out in August if you want to know all the details about why I think Flawless and Heartless are just so good. Some of my favorite contemporaries that I've read recently, just amazing. The next book that I read was Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonham Young, and this was so interesting. So there's an author note at the very beginning of this book where Hannah goes into detail about like this book is very personal to her, and this heroine is very personal to her because Hannah suffers from a disability. She was born with an underdeveloped right hand. The hand just did not develop, normally. So she does have that disability. The first meeting between our hero and our heroine is just so cute and so charming. Wynn is at a Halloween party. Her best friend, who is happily married, they always throw a Halloween party, and Wynn always goes as a pirate because she gets to use like a little hook. Like her hand is perfect for having that, hook as a pirate. And everyone keeps telling her like, oh, that's such a good couple's costume. And she's confused because she's like, well, I didn't come with anybody. Like nobody else is paired with me. And then she's introduced to this man who's also wearing a pirate costume. He has a below the knee amputation, and he's dressed his prosthetic up as a peg leg and as a pirate. So they go together and they hit it off like right away. The banter is so great. They're making jokes and not getting offended by it, and they're like just enjoying the fact that they can be themselves and kind of like joke about their disability. Like nobody's trying to like tiptoe around them and make it feel awkward. And so it just like they hit it off right away, and they have a one-night stand. Like a month and a half later, Wynn finds out that she's pregnant. So this is an accidental pregnancy. And I think what makes this book so charming and so beautiful, it's a slow burn, accidental pregnancy, like one night stand, and then it goes from friends to slow burn lovers, and I really, really love it. So when Wynn tells Bo that she's pregnant, he is all in. He's like, absolutely, I want to be involved in this baby's life. He actually has a history of cancer, and that's what happened to his leg. So he wasn't even sure if he'd be able to have kids just because of like the radiation, the medication and stuff. So like he sees this as a gift, and he really admires Wynn, and he's suggests, because Wynn is a little bit down on her luck, she doesn't have like the greatest, most stable, well-paying job, and he suggests, hey, why don't you move into my house? I have an extra room. I also have a room that we could set up for the baby, and you could just save up money for a year. Like just give it a year, seeing like what living together would feel like, and I can support you, and it would just be great, right? So they're living together and they're getting to know each other, and they've decided that the one night stand was amazing, but they're also like, that would be a complication if we continue that, because we have to really think about, if it doesn't work out, we're still going to be in each other's lives for the next 18 years, and we get along well right now. We don't want to mess that up, okay? So of course there's lots of mutual pining going on in this book, and it was so well done and so beautiful. I love this book so much. I gave it 4.5 stars. Like, it was just so great. Bo is such a marshmallowy, sweet hero. He's a little bit nerdy too, which I really loved. And I absolutely loved the friendship between Wynn and her best friend and her husband. Like, it was just, I think that the relationship in this book were just so well done and so endearing and just so charming. I had such a great time, and I felt just so effervescent like the whole time while I was reading this book. So absolutely 100% recommend this book. And lastly, I decided that since I was interested in the new release this month by Julianne Long, and I found out that this was book 6 in a series called The Palace of Rogues, I was like, I want to start from the beginning of the series before I read book 6, right? I don't want to read them out of order. I want to read them in order. So Anyplay has all of the audiobooks, and I was like definitely going to be listening to the audiobooks, and I'm binging the series, okay? The first book, Lady Daring Takes a Lover, this premise was so interesting, and I think that Julianne Long, she does have some very almost unique storylines, I would say, for historical romance. Our heroine Delilah has recently been widowed, okay? And she found out that her husband, he has a lot of debts. So, you know, debt collectors are coming, you know, her house, he didn't own outright. A lot of her possessions are being taken, you know, to pay off those debts. And she's in a meeting with her husband's solicitor being like, is there anything? And he's like, oh, well, there's this one building that he owned outright near the docks, like not the greatest part of town, like some rough sorts are in that area. And that's the only thing that you basically own now. And then the meeting's interrupted by this other woman who walks in, and she is talking about how, oh, like Daring must have left me money to pay for this, and this, and all that jazz. And the solicitor's trying like to be like, oh my God, wait, don't say any more. Well, this just so happens to be Delilah's husband's mistress. And so they meet. Delilah and the mistress meet. Her name is Angelique. And instead of it being like an antagonistic relationship, they both bond over the fact that they're left high and dry by basically their protector. And instead of like hating Angelique for being her husband's mistress, it's not like she was in love with him. She decides like, this is a woman who really is down on her luck, and maybe if we team up together, we can figure out a way to survive. And they decide to go visit the building that is the only possession that her husband had left after all of his debts. And it actually used to be a brothel, like way back when. And they're like, okay, we see the potential, we can make this an inn. And so this is, they become businesswomen basically, and they're trying to clean up this building in an unsavory part of town and trying to make it like a respectable place that people would maybe want to stay in. And that's how she meets the hero of the story. His name is Captain Tristan Harding. He works for the crown, and he is actually working on discovering like these smuggling rings, and he has suspected Delilah's husband in the past. So unintentionally, he kind of gets roped into renting a room from this new and improved Grand Palace on the Thames, which is what they're calling it, even though everyone else refers to it as the Palace of Rogues because of its history of being like a brothel in the past. And he becomes a tenant, and he's renting a room, and he and Delilah start having an affair. And I really think that this romance was so beautifully well done. He obviously has a secret of like, he's investigating, and maybe he doesn't know if Delilah was involved in Daring's, you know, illegal activities, and he just doesn't know. So he doesn't say anything. So he's keeping a secret from Delilah. And Delilah, for the first time, like being an independent woman, she's like, I would love to know what it's like to be with a man that I actually like and admire and I have feelings for. So anyway, I really enjoyed this book. It was a great start to the series. I gave this one 4.5 stars. And I will be continuing with the rest of the series and hopefully be able to read all of it before the 6th book, the newest book, comes out. So that's it. Those are the books that I read for the first half of July, and I think it was a pretty great start to July. Like, this is probably one of the strongest months that I've had in a while as a whole. So I'm very happy with that. Very happy with that. And I hope the second half of July is just as good. So if you like this video, give it a big thumbs up. And if you're not already subscribed to my channel, make sure you subscribe to get notified on any future videos that I do. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, life's better with a little HEA. Bye guys.